2, 1. Hello, thank you for your patience. We figured out technology, and I think it's really ironic that our youngest of all of our guests was the one that had a hard time with the technology. But I want to introduce Tayjus. Tayjus, I've known for quite a few years now and kind of watched him become an independent adult that he is now. I met him in high school, and now he's off living on his own. And so I thought he will have a lot of things he can share with us about some of the challenges, how he has met some of those challenges, and just some tips on living independently with a disability. And that's what we want to chat about today. So Tayjus, anything that kind of comes off the top of your head of some of kind of the daily challenges that you faced or how you've dealt with things?
Yeah, no, and I'm really excited to be here as well. Thank you for the invite, Joni. As far as things that come to mind, I would say probably off the top of my head, I mean, I think, the biggest thing is finding caregivers, finding personal care assistants. I think, there's definitely some challenges, but it's well worth the challenge because, PCs have given me so much independence and the ability to live on my own and be independent. But I think, it can be quite a challenge finding the right caregivers, getting used to, PCAs if you've never had someone help you other than your parents. There are a lot of things to get used to. So I would say that's probably, initially that was the biggest challenge. But I think once you get used to that, once you figure it out, it's, definitely liberating, if you will. So, but yeah, I mean, some of the challenges are, going about recruiting people, interviewing people, instructing them on how to do things the way you want them to do, and, things of that sort.
So can we take a step back? Because some people may not be familiar with PCAs and that term and what it means. So basically, before you went off to college, your parents were the ones that helped you with mobility for transfers and things like that, hygiene, your general care. Exactly. So then when you went off to college and you're living in a dorm,
exactly.
So that's when you started hiring PCAs or personal care attendants to kind of help you with all those kind of daily life activities.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So like you said, up till college, it was always my parents, with the exception of, some other family, but outside of family, maybe the only other person was my aide in high school. And the extent of how they helped me was mostly with the restroom. But not sort of the whole aspect of living on my own and, getting ready for the day and, the activities of daily life. So yeah, that's correct. And so when I got to college, I guess I still wonder how I was ready. Sometimes I wonder, it's like, wow, I was ready. But yeah, so, my parents were like, we're going to make it happen. And that's when, started looking for people. But I think initially the decision we made was to go through a home healthcare agency, just because, we were so new to everything. And naturally, it's scary for anyone, when they get to that stage. There's a lot of anxiety involved in, how do you know you found the right person to assist? And, what are some of the challenges that might come with it? So, yeah, I think that context is very helpful. I mean, I'm sure that's the case for, most of my friends, a lot of people I know, it's only when they got to college that they had to learn how to, use caregivers other than their parents.
Yeah. What about some of the accessibility kind of things that you've dealt with? So you're a full-time power chair user. And what are some of kind of the challenges you faced maybe on the college campus or even now that you're in the working world?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so, as you know, I'm a full-time power chair user. And I think, obviously being a wheelchair user, there's already, a number of challenges. I mean, accessibility being probably one of the biggest challenges. So, often, I find myself, and find inaccessible buildings, restaurants that might not be accessible. I think, fortunately growing up in New Jersey, a lot of places were accessible. You had curb cuts and navigating the streets or, just getting in my car was very easy. But when I went off to school, there were two sets of challenges. So one, on campus, getting around, navigating the streets with snow, and then even on campus, a lot of buildings were either other dorms that I had friends in were not accessible, or all the classrooms were accessible, but not in the easiest way. So the biggest challenge was figuring out the accessible routes and figuring out how to manage in that sense. And then, as part of that, living in a city, there's a lot of other challenges. So, snow on the streets. If they don't clear the snow, in a wheelchair, you're not really going anywhere. Um, well, that's not totally true. If there's only an inch of snow, which I've done, it was not a problem. But yeah, I think that was definitely a challenge. Not being able to go to other friends' dorms. But I think the key is it just involves a lot more planning, right? So, fortunately, it's pretty easy these days to check if restaurants or different places are accessible. And even with my college buildings, I had other friends in wheelchairs who were able to guide me and show me the accessible entrances. But yeah, definitely a challenge, and it's still a challenge now. I think in California, I would say most restaurants, most buildings are very accessible. But it's things like if I have a friend in this area and if their apartment or house is not accessible, then it can be limiting. So that's one of the challenges I think I would face now. And I guess if we kind of go a little bit deeper on accessibility, sometimes buildings don't have the access button. Or at work I need to scan my badge to get into the office. I need someone to do that for me. Or if the ramp is blocked. So there are some challenges. But I feel like all in all, it hasn't been. I'm fortunate in the sense that it hasn't been too bad in all the places that I've lived. So.
What about socially? How have you kind of found, when you're not able to participate in all the same things as other people, what have kind of been some of the ways that you've been able to connect with other people, or kind of your kind of creative solutions to make that happen?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. Socially, it can obviously be hard when you're a wheelchair user, you're not able to do some of the same physical activities as your friends. But I would say, as a kid and even now, I kind of, focus more on the things that I can do and the ways I can connect. So I think, as a kid, honestly, I would say that the biggest way was through video games. I think for me that, I think that's an automatic way to connect, with anyone in that age range. It's something to talk about, something, where other people can't see the disability. And what's great now too is they have like the Microsoft Accessible controller and lots of ways that, people who maybe previously couldn't play video games can now play video games. So for me, I think that was a big thing. I was fortunate as well in that a lot of my friends were not necessarily, as into, they followed sports a lot, but, they, weren't so into, more physical activities. So, finding that right group, it can take time. Finding friends who understand the situation, but, can still spend time with you. And I think finding friends as well who are more okay with, just chatting or just hanging out at your house. And that can be hard to find. It takes a while to find those friends, but there's people out there like that. So, but yeah, I think that's definitely a challenge. I think, as I've gotten older too, it's just, I think people are more willing to, they'll go out to restaurants or, and then it's easy to talk to people there. There isn't that piece of, physical activity, or people want to play board games, for example. I think that's, that reminds me when I was in high school, had a game night. Actually, it started when I was 11 and it went until I was 14. So I'd have a game night. So my friends, loved board games and they would come over and we'd play board games. And, I never felt any different because, they weren't like, oh, let's go run, or, they wanted to play board games. So,
now, you may not even know this, I don't know, but was that something that your parents thought of and were like, oh, that might be a great way to kind of engage your friends and get together in the way that you were able to fully participate in, or is that just something that naturally happened?
Yeah, that's it. That's a very interesting question. And funny enough, I actually still remember our first game night. I remember I was like in fifth grade, and one of our neighbors, like I'm still friends with him. When we moved into our house, they just moved in, and he's been my friend. Like, he's the same age as me, so we've been friends for almost 20 years at this point. So I remember back in fifth grade, his mom called my mom and was like, "Oh, we're gonna have a game night, and I want to invite Tayjus, and we're gonna have pizza. Tayjus should come." And ever since that, we were kind of hooked, and we kept hosting it. We would switch whose house it was in, and gradually they would do it in my house as well. As as it got harder to go to other people's houses. But I still think back, and I'm very grateful that my friend's mom as well sort of thought of that and was like, "Oh, I think Tejas could be involved." So I think, like I said, there's definitely people out there who have that sensitivity or that awareness. And, and I think when kids see that too, that's great, right? Like their parents understand. So, but I'm sure my parents were like, "Wow, this is great. This is a great group of friends for Tejas." And, and I'm still friends with all those friends today. So.
Yeah, you found a great group of friends like in high school and maybe before that middle school, but then come college, you had to start all over again.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, one thing that was good is that was the case for everybody. Everyone when they start college is looking for that friend group. Now, granted, of course, having a disability, using a wheelchair can, there are other challenges you have to worry about. So, for me, it was first getting used to the PCA, the caregivers, which, actually didn't, once I got used to it, was not so bad. But I think definitely that does complicate the friend piece because you have to find friends who, are, maybe more, more willing to kind of be at home or, play video games or kind of meet up like that. I think for me, a major challenge was just accessibility. Was able to meet people in classes and at meals. But if they didn't have an accessible dorm, that kind of made it hard. If they had some people over, and then I couldn't go over, I think there were some challenges. But I think, it took time, and I did find, the right friend group. I think, like anything, it takes time, but in the long run, I think it's better to find that group and find a group, or not even a group, just a couple of people who I think are comfortable with your situation and you're comfortable with them. And you figure out what to do. So, eventually I found a good group of friends that, they were very, they just, naturally they just accepted kind of my situation. Obviously I had to open up as well. But I think it wouldn't be honest to say, it's not, it will be very easy socially. Maybe for some people it might be, and I think if you have the option to go somewhere with a friend, that could be great. But on the other hand, I think, being on my own, having to, figure out how, meeting people, I think there's, very useful skill in sort of, how, what kinds of friends you want to have and what are the things that you enjoy doing. But, there were definitely some challenges, but I think, I was fortunate to find a group that I'm still friends with. So.
Now, how do you handle the situation? Because I'm sure you still kind of deal with this all the time, that is it a bit of an elephant in the room where it's, obviously there's a wheelchair, another person, it may be something maybe more subtle or, or something like crutches or a walker. How do you deal with that conversation where that someone wants to ask why you're in a wheelchair, or they're thinking like, what's going on, and do you just bring it up, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, I know that's a great question. So, and we've discussed this, and I'm sure for some of the people listening, I'm sure you've had people who have just been very blunt and straight up asked, "Oh, what's wrong?" or "Why are you in a wheelchair?" And then obviously you have little kids who are curious. But yeah, no, I think that's a common question. I mean, In college, I did have some friends who asked up front. Initially I really didn't like it because my whole thought was, is that the only thing you're going to ask about? On the other hand, I think, with time, I realized that if people want to know, and they're mature about it, and,
Yeah.
then I think people should be free to ask. And, the more they know, the better. Because I think, this is the reality of my life. So I should be able to share it with people. And if there are people who are interested, then by all means. That said, I mean, I think there are people who, there is that elephant in the room where some people are curious, and they're not sure if they can ask. Um, it's interesting because I feel like either people have just straight up asked me and it can be awkward, but I've gotten used to responding. But I would say I have other friends who have not once asked at all. They never said like, oh, like what's the situation? They know I'm in a wheelchair. They know maybe they start to learn I have a caregiver, that I can't do stuff. I think it's tough because at least for me personally, unless someone asks, I don't go out of my way to tell them. Um, but I think it can be helpful to tell people. So not exactly an example with friends, but for example at work, I think I have a boss who likes to know more, and there is that elephant in the room. She has an employee in a wheelchair, but I think explaining to her, and the more she has learned, I think the better that it is. Um, and that's what I realized with my friends. I shouldn't be embarrassed. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. I may not need to tell them my whole medical history, but I think the biggest thing is, the more they know, then if I need help, they can offer. They know what I need help with. So I think that's definitely a chat that is tough when you have people who, are curious. I think if you know, yeah, so it's tough. I don't know if I would actually go out of my way to, if I can sense it. I don't think I will be like, oh, by the way, this is my diagnosis, and this is the
Right.
situation. But like I might explain, okay, I have help I have personal care assistants or caregivers at home, because I think on the other hand, it's obvious, there's a lot of things I cannot do, and it's kind of silly to pretend that I'm doing everything by myself. So
Yeah, it's tricky though, because on one hand, it's no one's business. But on
exactly,
the other hand, sometimes it's probably kind of good to somehow just get it out of the way and just acknowledge it and then move on.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So shout out to Stephanie and Aiden who are watching. Um, Stephanie commented, and I'm just going to share a story that Aiden once told me that he was he was in a movie theater, and I think it was a kid. Was like, oh, I'm sorry about your broken leg. And, just one of those like awkward situations where it's like, I don't have a broken leg, but it's also none of your business what is going on. So it's just one of those, weird kind of awkward situations.
Definitely, yeah. And I'm sure Aiden is probably used to, like, it's happened enough where you sort of are like, okay, whatever, you just not ignore it, but like, it's, and when kids ask, it's pretty cute sometimes when little kids are fascinated. But yeah, I think at this point I've gotten enough where I'm like, well, okay.
Kind of roll your eyes and move on.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about transportation? I know that like you got pretty darn good at planes, trains, and automobiles, but between living in Boston and coming back and forth between New Jersey and California, how have you managed all the kind of transportation pieces?
Yeah, no. So I think definitely I've had a lot of experience down, definitely a lot of challenges, but well worth it. And I think the biggest part of all this traveling is definitely the key. The key is planning, to plan early, plan everything early. And it's something that I'm still learning. I still procrastinate on some of these things, but I realize that earlier you can plan. But yeah, I mean, I think so in terms of getting, when I was in college, I was fortunate that my parents could come pick me up. We had a wheelchair van, so they would pick me up. And then, although I did take the train once, so that was, another adventure, another interesting thing to try, testing Amtrak, and that was a good experience. Um, it was quite accessible, and was overall good experience. And then I think, when I was in Boston, obviously I didn't have a car, so a big part was figuring out how to get around. So, from, coming from New Jersey, where I would just get in the car all the time, here I had to, constantly be checking Google Maps and figure out, walking directions, and then, once I started to get more adventurous, start figuring out public transit. So, you know, so in Boston, they had buses and a subway system. So I think that was definitely a first for me. So, had to really start, like I said, looking at Google Maps and planning ahead, planning my route for how I'm going to get somewhere and leaving a lot of time. So, had the chance to take the subway to, throughout Boston. And, a lot of that's learning. One time my chair did get stuck when I was getting off the subway. And sort of after that, I learned, I should ask the employees there to put what they call a bridge plate. It's basically just a ramp of sorts that goes between the platform and the train. But, the key was staying calm during that time.
What did you do when you were stuck, though?
Yeah, no, so I'm trying to remember. So basically got stuck. And then, even though I knew that the train was not going to go anywhere, obviously in my mind, I'm thinking like, oh my God, what's going to happen? The train is going to start moving. Fortunately, there was someone, someone on the train saw that it was stuck, and, they helped to push the chair out. And luckily the conductor or one of the employees came out and saw. So they just made sure it was okay. And, luckily it was fine. But definitely did scare me a little bit. But, then I was like, rather than be scared, there's a solution, and that's the bridge plate. And then got really used to taking the buses everywhere. Had never taken a public city bus really before that. So in Boston, they have a really great system. They're very good with accessibility. So all the buses have ramps and lower down, and they also tie you down. They have tie downs for the chair in the bus. So got very comfortable with that. And I knew I had to get used to all of this if I wanted to see Boston, if I wanted to do stuff. Otherwise I was just going to be stuck, in the area around me. So I realized that I had to get comfortable with it. And then at some point they got Uber, actually wheelchair accessible Uber in Boston. And so that was, great as well, to be able to go places a little bit later at night.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those experiences were great because, when I've gone to other cities, I've been interested in, trying out the public transit to see how I can get around. So, when I lived in Washington, D.C. as an intern, got to try the system out there, which was great. In New York, which, was a little bit intimidating just because of how big it is. Got to try out the subway. I got to try out their buses and even one of their ferries. So, that was great. And, even when we traveled to Germany, was very comfortable with taking the trains in Germany and the buses. So I think, definitely was great. Not having to depend on someone to drive me, that independence of taking public transit. And then now sort of, I live in the suburbs again, so I need someone to drive me. So it's not my favorite thing. But another piece of transportation. So, getting used to someone else driving me, letting friends drive me. So, I think I've come to, weirdly enjoy public transit. And every time
Mm-hmm.
I have the opportunity to take public transit, it's my chance to test out the system, see how things are. So,
Yeah. How do you deal with, how things just take a lot longer? How do you kind of build that into your schedule and kind of just manage that throughout the day?
yeah. No, I think that's definitely a challenge. I mean, so, starting from my morning routine, for example, I know, it definitely takes longer than it takes someone who, doesn't have my needs. So, like for me, it takes about an hour and a half. I think at this point, I don't really know anything different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like, it's just a part of my life. It's just a part of, how things are. But yeah, I think that's a challenge. I mean, the morning routine, there's not much, that can be done. I mean, that's, it's important to take your time with things like that. But I think maybe the biggest kind of takeaway that I've had is, the importance of obviously planning, but giving yourself enough time, giving yourself a lot of time, because inevitably there's going to be possibly some delays, whether that's adjusting, let's say your shirt is uncomfortable, or, I need to be adjusted in my seat, or things like that, or I have to go to the bathroom. So a lot of that is, making sure I plan, give myself enough time. I think many times I have been late, and sort of just, the excuse was, my situation. But I think in some situations, that, you should try to be, if you can be, you have to allocate more time. I mean, it's definitely frustrating sometimes with my morning routine, or even, know that I have to plan more, or, for example, getting to the airport earlier. But I think ultimately it leads to a much less stressful experience if you're not panicking, if you're not rushing, if you can take your time. So I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, from traveling as well, and just in general. It's important to give yourself enough time. And it can be frustrating, but I think that's just the nature of, if to be able to go out and see the world. That's just the nature of how things are. And I get used. I've gotten used to it. So.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of at your workplace, some of the accommodations, some of how they've made it work? What are some of the things you've asked for? Some of the things that from being there you've learned to maybe I need to ask for something different?
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, I guess sort of my first caveat, at least in my current job, I work at Google, so I'm definitely spoiled in terms of some of the, perks, and, both from a not, from a non-accessibility standpoint, but, from, an accessibility standpoint, unfortunately, this is not the reality of how, it is everywhere. And I kind of wish it was. And I mean, I've had the opportunity to see what it was like as an intern, at companies where, I have to figure out a lot of things on my own. So I guess I can start with some context of what it's like in previous, in, other work environments first. So the main things that I have to think about, right, are, bathroom, having a personal care assistant who can come in and assist me with the bathroom. So accessible bathroom, and then having someone who can come into the building and assist with the bathroom. And then, people to possibly help with, so the commute to work, and then possibly, helping me with lunch or things like that. So as an intern, at least, I think in many offices they do have a doctor's office, or they do have accessible bathrooms, and more we're seeing a lot of these gender neutral bathrooms, which are bigger bathrooms, and, and important if, for example, you're a caregiver, your parent has to help you, and, it's like your mom versus, and, as a son. So for me, that's obviously important. So usually the first questions have been, is there a bathroom that I can use? And then what permissions do I need for my caregiver to come into the office? So, do they need to come in as a guest every time, or do they need to fill out any paperwork? For the most part, I've been able to just bring them in as a guest, or they could just wait outside the office. So I think, that's one component. The other component has been just actual workplace accommodations, so things that I need to be able to do my job. So a big part of that is the right desk setup, the right computer setup, a workspace that I can maneuver through and get around. A lot of that might involve, making sure that the desk works, or removing a chair so I can get there, moving trash bins. Um, and I've been fortunate to work in some places where they do have height adjustable desks. So that's great for me because, then I can adjust it to whatever height works for me. I've also had to manage with desks that did not work at all. And, had to ask them to actually remove some cabinets from the desk, which they were able to do. So I think the biggest thing is that advocacy piece, asking for the accommodations. And then sort of in my job right now, a lot of that stuff is the same. So, the first question is, you know, sort of bathroom and care, and, do I have someone who can assist me with the bathroom? So, I'm fortunate that at Google, they actually offer caregivers at work. So that's one of the benefits provided by Google. And that's probably the best benefit that, they have. Very few other companies have that. So, when I get to work, a personal care assistant meets me at the door, and then we go to my desk, which is a height adjustable desk, which is great. So then we get to work. They take out my laptop from my backpack, get it set up on the desk, get my headphones on, and then they assist with the bathroom throughout the day, with getting food as well. So, when I go to lunch, they help me get food, and, let's say I need help with feeding, they can help with that. I've even brought in one of my pulmonary breathing devices, the cough assist, when I had a cold. So, the people who I've worked with at Google who are, they've been great. They're really nice. And the woman who helps me right now is, she definitely has that motherly instinct. So the other day I went in the elevator with someone, with my other friend in a wheelchair. And she was very worried that I was in the elevator by myself. So that's the other piece, having a personal care assistant. And then lastly, the bathroom part at Google. So again, fortunate at Google, they have a lot of these single stall or gender neutral bathrooms, which is great. The only challenge is when you have other people using it who don't necessarily need it. And that's been a problem I've been facing lately. So I've been having to wait 15 minutes sometimes just to use the bathroom. And it's very frustrating. And so, I reached out to Google and I explained the situation. So at Google, they actually have signs that say, please be respectful of the bathroom. There are people who don't have any other options than this bathroom. So the hope is that will deter people. It hasn't necessarily, but I can't really complain with how things are. I think I've been fortunate, but I think I've had a lot of practice, if you will, from working in different working environments. One of the other cool things that Google I've observed is they have, in the elevators, they have buttons at the foot level. So I can go hit it with my foot in my wheelchair. It will open the elevator. I go in the elevator, hit the button to go to the second floor. And, so then I'm very independent, and, so that's great. So, but yeah.
You had some issues at Harvard with that. I remember some of the elevators.
Exactly.
You couldn't get to the buttons.
Yeah, but here, they're above and beyond. There are other wheelchair users as well at Google, so they've really, paved the way. And I think one other great thing I have to mention is, so at Google, they have an on-campus car service to get from building to building. And Google actually has around 6 wheelchair accessible vans. And so that's great. I really use it, take it to, to go everywhere, to go get lunch, to, do all kinds of things. And so that's a great perk that, that I feel like I had to mention. So
yeah, that is great. Okay, let's see. I don't know if we're going to come up with 10 on the fly, but top 10 dumbest things that people have said to you. I can think of 2 off the top of my head. You want to hear my 2?
Yeah, let's.
Are you ready? You want to hear my 2?
Yes.
Okay. Number 1 is you were a senior in high school, about to graduate, and I don't know if it was an aide or a teacher, someone said to you, oh, so are you going to college, or you didn't understand that, disability, it was a physical disability.
Uh-huh.
And you were very polite and didn't say, actually, I'm going to Harvard, which is what I wanted you to say, but you were very polite instead. But that's one. Another one is you were in New York going for a job interview. Mm-hmm. And so you were in a suit and dressed nicely, and someone came up to you and said, oh, good for you of getting out there, and something like very like condescending. So that's two I can think of.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There's a lot.
I'm sure.
um, I mean, I guess one that probably could be combined into a lot is why are you in a wheelchair? But I don't know if that's that dumb actually. I'm trying to think.
It's kind of dumb to say it to a stranger.
Exactly, yeah. Let's see. People have said what happened? Random
Mhm.
people were just like, what happened? Um, I had I think someone asked my mom without even knowing me. Their first question was, "Does he go to a special school?" Which, you know, someone who doesn't know me should not be asking that. It's none of his business to make any assumptions like that. So that I think that was a weird one. Um,
And do you related to that? Have you seen? Because I know that like my mentor, who's hard of hearing, she finds
mhm.
that like if she's out to dinner with her husband, like the waitress will talk to her like a child
Uh-huh.
and then talk to the husband instead of talking to her. Have you
Yep.
had
Yeah.
that where people don't talk to you directly?
That's happened, or they don't even ask me at all. Like they automatically are asking, my caregiver who's with me, even though I'm the one paying. So sometimes, they don't ask me. I think a lot of it, I think it's just ignorance, but it's frustrating. Even when I went to the doctor, I think that's one interesting thing too, the OT at the neuromuscular clinic was asking my PCA why the insurance company did something, and I was very frustrated because like I'm right here. Why are you talking to them?
Yeah,
So I think that's a funny one. Not at funny at the time.
right.
Uh, let's see. Some stranger once asked me, "Can I pray for you?" Um, and the person I was with, more of an acquaintance, was like, "Oh, why did you say no?" So that was
You're too polite.
yeah. So,
Or you could be like, can I pray for you? Because you clearly need some prayers.
exactly. um, let's see what else. Not necessarily a stupid one. I think a attempt to be very helpful, but it comes across as silly. They're like, "Oh, we can carry your wheelchair in. We can carry you in the heavy power wheelchair." It comes from a good place, but not something I would usually accept. I would not usually want that. Even recently for at work, my manager hosted a friendsgiving, and as it turned out, wasn't able to get into her house, even though I thought I could. And we were able to accommodate the situation by going into her backyard. But one of the other managers was like, "Oh, can we carry your chair in?" Which comes from a good place, but I think a lot of people don't realize the chair, how heavy the chair is, and you
Yeah.
know, it's not something I'm comfortable with. Um, Let me see. I'm trying to think of
Oh,
what some
and Aiden said that he's also had that same thing of people saying, "Can I pray for you?"
really. Yeah, so
Yeah.
definitely was weird, especially because I was in Cambridge around the Harvard Square area, but not weird because it's a city and you get people like that
People
who
of
act
all
weird.
kinds. Yeah.
Yeah. um, let's see.
Have you had people try to push your wheelchair? It's a
Oh
power
yeah,
chair, so it's a little different, but have you had people do that?
yep. People have tried to, or one thing that I get frustrated with is when they lean on my chair, or like I have these anti-tip wheels on my power chair, and people will just start kicking it because they think it's fun, and I can't tell. And then like if a friend, and it's interesting if a friend does that, I don't mind it in the sense of like I feel it almost feels like I'm being included, like that they are, it's almost like a friend, like I don't know, like not necessarily putting their hand around your shoulder, but like
Yeah.
it feels like okay, they're comfortable with it, but it's weird when someone I don't know decides to lean on the chair, and then it's very awkward. So not necessarily a dumb thing that they've said, but Um, let's see.
There's a woman on Twitter that she posted a picture of her wheelchair. She put spikes on the
Uh-huh.
handle because she was so sick of people just pushing it
Yep.
and either helping her or just moving her out of the way. So she got some kind of spikes that she could put on the handles so no one would do that anymore.
Yeah, I think it's necessary sometimes.
And
Oh,
so
I
Aiden
see
said that kids play with the wheels on his walker, and it
Uh-huh.
drives him crazy.
Yep. So, yeah, that's definitely frustrating when it's, like I said, when it's a friend, it's okay. If it's not a friend, then it's annoying and an invasion of my space, basically. Like the chair is like an extension of me, and so when someone thinks that they can just touch it, that's frustrating. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think. Um, Can't think of anything else. I mean, you got the one about at a restaurant, they will, half the time they won't talk to me. They'll talk to, who, and I think luckily it depends on who I'm with. If I'm with people who look like they're in their 20s, then I think they realize, like, most people make the connection, like, okay, he must be a part of this group. And to the point where, and I think I've told you this when I've gone to bars, sometimes they don't even ID me because I think they're worried they'll offend me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I think when I'm with my parents or people who look older, then it's more likely to happen. So that's definitely an interesting thing I've noticed.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting. I never thought about the whole ID thing and how the dynamic would be for getting your ID checked or not.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Any last tips of just dealing with, dealing with just kind of living with a disability in this world and kind of how you cope and how you just kind of focus on the positive and living your life and managing all of that?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great thing to close with too, sort of, and obviously, it's definitely hard. I'm not going to say that, it's the easiest thing and, it's easy. Um, but, I think at the end of the day, like, I'm fortunate to live somewhere where it's, very accessible. I'm able to have, work a job and live independently. I think there's always going to be some challenges, but I think gradually, you start to get used to some of these challenges, I've had some of these challenges before, and you start to figure out what to do. Um, I think for me, the biggest, yeah, I still get frustrated now, obviously, but I remind myself like it's all sort of part of, some of, and my parents say this, it's sort of a journey in the sense of, there are going to be challenges. But I think it's made me a great problem solver. It's made my parents sort of not get stressed at all for most things. And I'm not someone who gets stressed because I've learned that getting stressed does not solve anything. It's better to be calm and think clearly. How can we solve the problem? And I think the biggest thing is, I don't let my challenges stop me from doing things. It's sort of almost motivation to say, well, okay, I have these challenges, but how can I make it still happen? If I want to go do this, if I want to, go to for example, a concert, or if I want to go somewhere that, doesn't seem, like if I want to live in California, I think it's important to think of, well, you can because of, whatever reasons, or it's important to focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. So I think that's something that's important. And then, I think in terms of dealing with people and people who are dumb, I think the biggest thing is a lot of it's just ignorance. And so it's a good opportunity to educate people. Not that you want your whole life to just be educating people, but I think there's some people who it's worth talking to and worth explaining the situation. Um, and I like to remind myself too, like when I go out in public, when I go places, I might be someone's first exposure to someone with a disability or, who looks different. So, I view it as a great opportunity to say, I'm here, this is my reality and, this is how I go about doing stuff and, you're going to see me. And if that little bit is some exposure that they get, something to educate them, then I feel like, then I've almost done my job, if you will, in that sense. Sort of, they've
Mhm.
got some exposure now. They've, maybe been put in a uncomfortable zone, but it's necessary for them to see someone like that. So maybe when they meet someone else like that, you know, they're a little bit more comfortable. So I think that's sort of the way I look at it, with people being ignorant, and and people are just curious. I think they're curious to understand how someone in that situation manages and leads their life. I mean, they have no comparison, so they're just curious. They're like, wow, when people, for example, people like to stare at my wheelchair van, or they look at the chair and they're like, oh, wow. But they're really just, they've never seen that. They're like, wow, this actually exists for people who have those challenges. So I think that's my closing thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tejas. I really appreciate you sharing all of your experience with everybody, and it really it's super helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joni, and was, and obviously all the stories, because whenever I have physical therapy, have told you all the stories. So glad I can share it, and glad that Aiden could relate. Aiden and whoever else is listening could can definitely relate to a lot of the challenges. And we can laugh about it together. So I think that's, and great part of I guess I'll add this too. Great part about having a community of other people who they just understand. You don't need to explain anything. They are on the same wavelength. Like they completely understand everything you're going through, and you can laugh about things and whatnot. So
Yeah, and sometimes that's the best solution. You gotta laugh.
exactly, yeah. And sometimes just looking back, it's just very funny stuff. So
Okay, thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
thank you, everyone. Have a good night.